Dear colleagues, welcome to our 12th International Conference for Teachers of English Language Teaching during COVID-19. I hope you're enjoying our sessions. And today I have the pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Erika Saito. Dr. Erika Saito is an assistant professor and course lead in the Masters in Social and Emotional Learning, SEL, and Masters in Education with an SEL emphasis at National University Sanford College of Education. She teaches research in SEL and SEL action research methods for educators. Prior to National University, Dr. Saito taught in Pepperdine University's MA TESOL program and teacher credentialing candidates in teaching English learners. Dr. Saito's background includes over 15 years as a pre-K through 12 classroom teacher, literacy teacher and special assignment, and ELD sheltered programs department chair in both public and private institutions in Southern California. Dr. Saito's research is published in Teachers College Record, School Community Journal, the Family Journal, and Berkeley Review of Education. She is currently K through 12 level chair for CATESOL, secretary-elect for Area's SEL Special Interest Group, associate editor for Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies in Education, and article editor for Issues in Teacher Education. Let's welcome Dr. Erika Saito.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that wonderful introduction. This presentation will focus on looking towards a post-pandemic future within educational settings and understanding the supports needed during this transition. It is something so many of us are trying to plan right now or are currently navigating, and with so many unknowns, I wanted to center this presentation largely on intervention and prevention frameworks that impact student behavior and ultimately their student learning. So I'd first like to thank the U.S. Department of State English Language Programs for this opportunity, as well as the National Pedagogic University Francisco Morazan for allowing me to be here today. So thank you so much. This presentation will start with two different openings or warm welcomes on mindfulness and mindset, understanding the current state of transitioning, the role of SEL in the transition for creating both resilient schools and adults. Examples for each of these will be provided. Then we'll go into understanding trauma in both adults and students. And lastly are these post-pandemic practices, or actually they could be practiced at any time, for both classroom and life application, and ending with an optimistic closure. So I would like to invite you to take part in a breathing activity. This is something that can be completed in an online space such as this one, or in person. So I invite you to find a comfortable position as we take a deep breath. And I also invite you to close your eyes or open your eyes as we start, whichever is more comfortable for you. So you can see where it tells you to hold it in, breathe out. Breathe in, hold it, and breathe out. Let's do this another time. Breathe in, hold it, and breathe out. Thank you so much for bearing with me on this, and feel free to continue breathing. This practice focuses on two SEL competencies, social emotional learning competencies, self-awareness and self-management. And it has proven to help people manage stress and anxiety. For adults and teachers in particular, these mindfulness practices over a period of time, and if they're done over a few weeks, have reported positive outcomes, including a decrease in feelings of stress, anxiety, burnout, and depression. It has also provided physical health benefits, including better sleep. A second start to opening this space is an activity that can be completed by students, by teachers, parents, just about anyone. If you do have a piece of paper handy, feel free to jot down these 3 different columns. This activity is called I have, I am, I can. And this is used to develop resilience. I will actually circle back to this activity later in the presentation, but I wanted to give a brief overview of what it is and how it works. So by identifying what we have, we are identifying the resources that are available and accessible to us, right? Within our school, within our family, and within our community. The middle column, I am, is our personal narrative, our story. And being able to openly and honestly just share our feelings. It could be feelings of frustration, challenges, or joy. And then the I can connects the two. It connects the I have and the I am with things that they can actually do soon. So this is like goal setting, right? Things you could do soon, realistic steps to help solve or address the situation that you're describing in these other 2 places. So as we go through these slides, I encourage you to take out a piece of paper, pen or pencil, and start writing down your I have, I am, and I can through these 3 key areas. So now we're going to take a slight shift. We opened up the space and we're jumping into some heavier content. It is important that we prepare ourselves for a post-pandemic world, whatever that looks like. To me, that means we first need to understand the educational context as a result of COVID. The information I'm providing is framed in both US and international settings. I will consciously try to separate these 2, but know the information across countries can be beneficial. So although we may not or ever be completely removed away from COVID, we are still planning to enter school buildings and make connections with our students and our colleagues. What we do know about the impact of COVID-19 right now in the US is that the emergency remote learning impacted academic growth across all subject areas. We had an achievement gap, right? We had an achievement gap in the US prior to COVID, and it did widen slightly during COVID, particularly for our Black and Latinx population. But however, all of our students have suffered academic loss by about 3 to 5 months. COVID also raised issues of inequities, particularly within technological disparities that included logging into their virtual classes. Again, students of color in the US, Black and Latinx in particular, were the most impacted, with the highest teacher reports of students who were unable to access technology to participate, and therefore the rates of online attendance dropped significantly, up to 30% in some cases. And separate from this was a loss of contact between families and schools at about the same rate. The hardest hit during the pandemic were our English learner population. The services received to support them were either limited or missing altogether. There were instances where there was a huge reliance on parental support, and this actually created a greater barrier between home and school due to language and miscommunication. It placed a strain on family resources, and it also impacted staffing. Many schools were not equipped to support English learners virtually. And in one California school district, and I'm in California, failure rates of English learners jumped to almost 50%. Okay, so this is huge, right? Undergraduate enrollment dropped across the US due to emotional, familial, academic, and financial barriers. Community colleges across the US suffered a 14% drop in enrollment. And interestingly, the drop were mostly in the male population across all races. Other financial hardships included housing, homelessness, food insecurity, which also existed pre-pandemic. Students with disabilities, or LGBTQ plus communities, were all impacted due to limited or no support during the transition. So the outlook for many of the undergraduate students, of course, it naturally raises concerns. It raises concerns about future enrollment, about their completion of their degrees, and then, of course, the future, their employment. At present, countries around the globe are returning to in-person instruction. The issues with anxiety and stress, in addition to the school requirements of teachers, has left an increased number of teachers leaving the field. Globally, the educational field needs millions of teachers for reopening, but also teachers who are prepared, that are ready to create this safe, equitable, and inclusive environment. The majority of schools around the globe have reopened or are partially reopened. For myself, I'm at an institution that made this huge decision to permanently stay remote. So we lost our campus. We're 100% online. And that was a result of COVID. And I think I see some benefits with it as well, in terms of being able to connect with people in rural areas. So now that we understand the impact of schooling and educator workforce, the underlying and much needed area of focus should be on mental health. The following information is from America's Youth Promise Alliance, of a representative sample of youth in the US between the ages of 13 and 19. And then separately, US Department of Ed reports on college students' mental health. Both offer a glimpse of how our students in middle school, high school, and college are reporting and identifying their mental health needs. So this is not the full report by any means, but just some of the findings. The majority of college students have reported stress or anxiety as a result of COVID. 1 in 4 college students have shown increases in depression. The majority of faculty within these colleges have identified poor student mental health. Within youth, all of the youth reported poorer health as a result of COVID. And this can include a range of areas, such as food insecurity, sleep deprivation, anxiety, and exercise. Those living in cities reported a higher rate of poorer health compared to those that were in rural areas. On a positive note, 60% of youth reported receiving social-emotional support from an adult, with 93% of these youth finding the support useful. This leads to the issue of those other 40%. So what happened to the 40% that did not receive the social-emotional support, and how can we reach these students? So COVID-19 raised these pre-existing issues, as mentioned earlier, within our educational system. It also raised areas where we can implement sustainable practices through our thoughtful shifts in the way we approach education. All schools want a safe reopening, and the decisions we make will impact tomorrow. So one area that I would like to highlight and honor is the resourcefulness and creativity that educators have shown throughout the transition in the ways they have adapted to online instruction. And this is evident in many of the presentations that I've heard so far. It's raised a greater understanding to the role of educators, particularly during the pandemic, when they have taken on several roles outside of just their instructional responsibilities. The self-reports of students have shown a greater need for support in developing the whole person, not just to focus on academics. This means creating a space for students to socialize, to relearn how to engage in conversations in person, right? How to build community, how to work with one another, which are all parts of a relearning process. This includes attending classes in isolation to shifting to in pairs physically, right? Some say the transition back will be equally traumatizing as the transition to home, the start of COVID, and we need to be prepared with the supports to guide our students in this transition. This is where social and emotional learning comes in. Social and emotional learning will be a key part of the transitioning process, where their schools will continue to stay remote in the coming months, move to hybrid, fully in person, whichever mode of instruction that happens. I believe that social emotional learning should already be part of your instructional practice and your self-care. Although I centered social emotional learning in my previous presentation, I wanted to review these 5 key areas, these 5 competencies of social emotional learning, or SEL, identified by CASEL. CASEL, again, is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. I would say that context underlying all of these competencies are also important, particularly in the ways that ethnicities and histories have shaped our understanding of these key areas. Defining social and emotional learning, as I've stated before, is so broad because it encompasses just about every action and every thought that we have. So the way we understand ourselves is SEL. The relationships we have with others is SEL. Our feelings are SEL. The hundreds, if not thousands of decisions we make each day are also SEL related. Our perspectives on societal issues, along with being able to empathize, is also SEL. That is why it is so challenging to pinpoint or define SEL. There is no common definition, and it can change based on culture and context. SEL is this lifelong developmental process, and the frameworks are limited to K-12 spaces and educational settings without looking into this broader connection to human development. So with the role of SEL in our transition back to in-person learning and moving towards a post-pandemic future, I took some of the key theories and frameworks connected to SEL as a way to consider how we can implement them within our classroom transition and in our own self-care. So I'll share some connections between SEL in each of these areas, and they overlap in many ways. These are drawn from multiple disciplines, not just within traditional K-12 settings, but also pulling from criminal justice, substance abuse, health, behavioral, and academic intervention lenses. As we know, social emotional learning is this developmental process of acquiring emotion regulation, social awareness, and self-awareness. In addition are the components of relationship building and decision-making. This overarching and wide-ranging and perhaps umbrella term is connected to newer frameworks that are tied to relationship building and behavior management. Restorative practices, for example, is largely built on repairing harm and punish-based approaches rooted in the US criminal justice system. So when we think about what happens when people go to jail, right? It's the punish-based. And some people have compared schools to jails, our jail system. School discipline has often taken a similar punitive approach to student misbehaviors. And restorative practices arose as a way to open dialogue and address the behavior through communication. Some of the restorative practices, these examples include restorative justice, which is repairing harm through discussion, coming to a resolution and an understanding. Community service, which should be meaningful. The service should be tied to right the wrong within the setting where this issue occurred. Community conferences, which bring people involved to voice their opinions and feelings to come to a resolution. Restorative circles, which is physically like a circle when you're in person, where there are ground rules that are set, it is facilitated, it involves turn taking, and also should lead to some resolution. And as you see at the bottom, social emotional learning. All of these practices and others have proven to be effective in building community and classroom relations, as well as social awareness. Another is positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS. It applies a multi-tiered framework which started in the health field for preventative health measures and has become more widely used in academic settings. PBIS supports good behavior, and it should be used as a preventative measure. So this might look familiar to you. I know that when I've taught literacy in the past, I also took a 3-tiered approach. And so this might be similar, like something familiar to you, where tier 1 is teaching and managing behavior Using this larger approach that is expected school-wide, these supports are provided to all students and uses assessment data to inform and monitor student progress. At the Tier 2 level, it's intended for small group prevention, and it focuses on students who require small group instruction to develop social skills, self-management, or academic support. And at Tier 3, it is more intensive. It's individualized support based on student needs. It's a team of people that are supporting students through leadership and student team meetings, and are more specific targeted strategies by experts, parents, community members, and school leadership. And this Tier 3 level may look different at different schools based on what is culturally appropriate. So this may seem familiar or similar to a structure that you're familiar with, and it's aligned with academic prevention and intervention with SEL and PBIS. While restorative practices takes time to introduce in your school, it's a completely new concept for some people, and it's hard to suddenly just drop it in. And PBIS requires school-wide buy-in. An easier approach tied to SEL is growth mindset. I know this was briefly mentioned earlier in another presentation, and today I wanted to talk a little bit more about it. There are two types of mindsets, according to Carol Dweck, who has written extensively on fixed and growth mindsets. So a fixed mindset is when a person believes that their skills, intelligence, and other abilities are fixed, meaning that it is set in stone, it does not change. And having a fixed mindset is unhealthy because there isn't this openness to growing and learning and challenging oneself. Having a growth mindset, though, is quite the opposite. It's a person who accepts the challenges. They learn from their mistakes. They want to develop further. They think creatively when they're given a challenge, and understands the way that intelligence is continuously reshaped. So this is just an example of an activity of teaching students, like what you would do, right? So being able to identify the issue that the student is facing, thinking about how the student is feeling is developing empathy. What are the feeling words that are being used? And what advice would you give a student who feels this way? So there are several activities that are like this that can start as early as pre-K, kindergarten, and you start to build growth mindsets, which is tied to resilience. And this is a very important piece, especially as we're transitioning back, right? We want our students to be able to face adverse situations and be able to come out of them in a positive way. So I wanted to share also two examples from the HarmonySL program. HarmonySL is part of the National University System where I teach at, and I put the website information down at the bottom, harmonysel.org. This is pulled from a pre-K kindergarten lesson on problem solving, and it goes through the steps of describing or acting out a scenario, thinking about how each person feels, so that's the empathy piece, and what they would do in this situation, and come up with a way to solve the problem. So this lesson and others offer students to take different perspectives. It's there to build empathy, to finding solutions to interpersonal problems, working cooperatively, understanding how to compromise, and practicing self-regulation. So these are things that can be explicitly taught. So I wanted to share too that HarmonySL is a completely free program. It's available online for educators, and the curriculum, teacher guides, and even trainings are all free. In addition to that, it's offered in English and in Spanish. It includes letters home to parents. So this is something I would strongly recommend. Here is another example for the upper grades of 5th and 6th grade. So as they get older, they may encounter varying levels of conflict. And students can self-reflect on how they approach difficult situations, and then can reflect on where they can grow and develop. So this is just another example of what something like you could do in the classroom very easily. So again, it's harmonysl.org. So problem-solving skills like this one and growth mindset are naturally connected to resilience theory, as it looks at the ways people are able to bounce back from adversity. Resilience research has looked at children who have experienced adversity or trauma are able to become more resilient when they have one trustworthy adult or mentor to support and guide them. Therefore, the adult connection is huge in determining one's resilience. Another factor is the environment of the student, being home, school, and community. These have shown to be influential places for fostering resilience. Resilience can be taught, but some may argue that it's not a program that you can teach because there are so many nuances within each child's experiences that it's part of this larger natural developmental process. Growth mindset and resilience have been adapted over the years to terms like adaptive mindset, resilient mindset, adapted thinking, and others. Creating a resilient mindset stems from the ideas of both resilience theory and growth mindset. Research in the past 5 years has started to look at adults rather than just children. As we know in our own experiences, we are continuing to face challenges in our schools, our organizations, as a result of COVID. So resilient mindset looks at thought awareness, which is building positive thinking. It's looking at perspective, so looking at the bigger picture of the situation and how it affects you now versus how it could affect you over the long term. Personal goals, so creating achievable, realistic goals. And cognitive restructuring, so changing the way you think about a negative situation. As I'm saying all this, I want to stress the role of the educator within this resilience space. An educator's mindset and SEL abilities is also a factor in fostering student resilience. That is how we see ourselves and the social-emotional skills that we have are transmitted into our students' performance. So what can we do to make a positive change within our work or school setting? I think it comes down to knowing the climate and culture of your work setting and looking at whether or not the environment is safe, welcoming, supportive, and culturally inclusive. Underlying this are clear expectations to our students and knowing the types of supports they have available that are academic and non-academic. So some activities we can do in the classroom, such as the I have, I am, I can that we started with, can help foster growth mindset and resilience. Other types of similar goal setting and reflective practices can also help. So this can include things like writing a personal narrative of a challenge and how they were able to overcome it, reading and discussing literature with characters facing adversity. Both fiction and nonfiction can be helpful for discussion. And then there's havens of resilience, which includes the key elements in school climate, with caring and support as the single most protective factor in resilience. Students often point to teachers as being the source for the care and support they receive. So this is a lot, right? It's a lot of weight that we're currently being thrown. And so with that, with us being these influential people in our students' lives, and that their resilience is ultimately leads to their academic success, we're also faced with additional challenges that we as educators are trying to grapple with. Prior to COVID, we were already working with students with trauma, right? We already had students who faced abuse. Maybe they experienced war, poverty, migration, and we're continuing to work with these students while also navigating our own path and understanding during COVID. In the first presentation on the state of COVID and education, I highlighted some things about what teachers know, the importance of SEL before COVID, and they also saw it as a prioritized need during COVID. Before COVID, teachers were overwhelmed. During COVID, teachers are also overwhelmed. So transitioning into whatever we're doing, we need to make sure that the support is there. Some other teacher challenges include being able to identify and feeling comfortable evaluating student trauma. This might mean having a checklist or look for signs of student behaviors and being provided training and resources. There's also this other area of secondary trauma that we don't often talk about. And secondary trauma is when we are feeling the trauma that was incurred by others. We care about our students, we care about our friends, our family members, our colleagues, and hearing about or witnessing their suffering has an effect on all of us. And it may come out in different ways. From internalizing the suffering, you may have difficulty focusing, and depending on the way we face challenges, it could come out as denial or the complete opposite, and you have these intense feelings. It could lead to personal involvement or completely escape. So this is an overwhelming piece that we are facing with our students and can lead to teacher burnout. So in addition to secondary trauma is our firsthand experiences, right? Being traumatized, or unresolved trauma in adults that can manifest in the following behaviors. And this adds to the importance of being trauma informed with our students. So some of these things can show up as anxiety or panic attacks in what would normally be a normal situation. It could be avoidance of people, avoidance of places, things, or avoidance of unpleasant emotions, possibly avoidance of things that associate with trauma, difficulty falling or staying asleep, feelings of detachment, feelings of needing to be on guard, an inability to tolerate conflict, an uncontrollable anger or acting on that anger. So one way to understand our own trauma is to recognize and acknowledge how we respond to issues. Much of this is informed by our childhood experiences and the ways we have attached or not to our caregivers. This example is how the attachment from childhood manifests into relationships we have in our adulthood. So looking at the 4 types of attachments as adults, think about where you fall. Are you secure and have a positive view of yourself and of others? Are you anxious? Do you seek high levels of emotional closeness and need approval? Are you avoidant and tend to suppress or hide your feelings? Or disorganized, where your feelings are mixed between having emotional closeness and not feeling comfortable with it? This all comes down to exploring our own identity. And this is an important start in the healing process. And I believe being comfortable with who we are, and examining our histories and examining our experiences, it's needed. It's needed to heal and be more open in understanding others. So now that we have started to explore this topic of trauma, I wanted to apply it into a framework that is used across organizational settings. The trauma-informed framework has these 6 key elements, and you can think of the ways that you are already implementing this with your students or ways that you could improve your organizational setting. So this includes first and foremost safety. So moving beyond physical safety, it also includes emotional safety. Being able to communicate with peers and instructors and feeling safe in doing so. This includes being in an online environment. Trustworthiness and transparency. This means the information and the directions are clear and transparent to all stakeholders involved. This can include anything from teachers, students, and families staying abreast of how school is operating, what are their guidelines, making sure that the communication is accessible to all. So if you're sending out emails and the families don't have emails, you're not making it accessible, right? What are the ways that families are able to interact with you? So being able to figure these things out are really important. And then there's peer support. How are we developing peers support? Where are we're providing opportunities to collaborate, to build trust, to share their experiences? In an online space, that might mean that we need to build time in for our peers to interact, to work together or in groups. With collaboration and mutuality, Building relations that extend just beyond teacher-student. This is inclusive of staff and administration in developing change. Empowerment, voice, and choice. Individual students and faculty should be recognized for their strengths and experiences endured. Empowerment builds resilience and work alongside one another in making these decisions. And lastly is the cultural historical inclusivity. Inclusivity of race, of ethnicity, nationality, gender, religion, social class. And cultural responsiveness is necessary in healing of the historically marginalized people. So what are some next steps? And I know I just threw a ton of information all at once, but what are some next steps? And I think this really starts with a needs assessment, identifying what do our students need, and even what do I need, right? So a needs assessment is always helpful, figuring this out first, because sometimes we like to make plans and they don't always work out, right? Because you realize it wasn't really needed. So being able to figure out what is needed first and being able to thoughtfully think about something that is sustainable would be wonderful. And then looking at the resources. How can we leverage our existing resources to support our students? Or what can we change within our existing resources to support our students, right? So sometimes you can use what you already have and just make subtle changes, and that will make a huge difference. Then there's the developing a plan. So how are we including cultural context within the plan? If we notice something's not working, do we continue this process, or are we able to refine it and improve it? So I know in some cases, in some places, they create a plan and they leave it and they never check to see if it's actually working, right? But we should continuously refine, continuously develop and improve our practices. And this includes plans. So I encourage you to think about how you can implement these things, whether it's just the piece of safety, the piece of peer support. These are simple changes that we can include. So the following practices are practices that are not limited to post-pandemic, even though I called it this. They're things that they're ready to use right now. So think about what you can do to improve your own social emotional development and self-care. If you're a teacher, I want to stress again the importance of your own understanding of SEL and your identity before diving into understanding students. I hope you take time into completing these next slides on a piece of paper or type on your digital device and reflect upon your responses. So right now it's about creating a self-care plan. And I mentioned this briefly in the other session, but being able to cope and heal and being able to teach social emotional learning begins with our own self-care practices. Creating a self-care plan is one way to address this. And hopefully you're able to see it. I know some of the words got blocked off a little bit. So the following 6 areas were introduced in a previous presentation to consider when you're thinking about self-care. And I've provided some guided questions to help you as you go through these 6 categories. So when you're thinking about your workplace or your institution, self-care can include the ways you develop professionally within your field. Reading and learning is part of self-care as well. In what ways are you staying abreast of current literature in the area you work in or your area of study? Separately, how do you consciously separate your time between work and your personal life? I know this can be challenging because in my case, being at home, my workspace is also my personal space, right? It's a 2-in-1. And it can be challenging to separate the two. So I still need to be able to say, I'm turning the computer off at this time, that's it, right? And then as soon as the computer is off, now I'm in my room. So it's being conscious and making sure that you're making this time. Another area to consider are the connections you make within your workspace or institution. How are you staying connected in supporting your peers or finding support in them? So it's a lot. I'm asking for a lot, but it's good to think about these things. And second is your physical self-care. What are you doing to support your physical health? This can include a range of areas from regular physical activity, eating a healthy meal, eating regularly, because I know some people forget to do this, sleeping well, taking breaks when needed, and we need to listen to our bodies. When our bodies are saying you're tired, you need to take a break, right? And making sure to take time off as needed. I know some people are so focused on work and they just want to work because they feel like they have to work. And there's a time in space where you have to realize and listen to yourself and give yourself that time. Psychological self-care includes activities that can help release stress or worry through writing, spending time with family or friends, or doing something relaxing. So think about activities that you enjoy outside of work to get your mind off of things. Or better yet, what are some activities that help you relax and release stress? I'm very curious. For spiritual, how do you engage or take time to reflect spiritually? This can be a range of things, from attending a church, mosque, temple. It can also include meditation, yoga, ways to connect with nature, and reflecting with close friends. Relationships are important, and staying connected, particularly during COVID, is important. So how are you maintaining a healthy relationship with the people you care about? How are you maintaining these relationships in your workspace, your institution, other organizations that you serve in, other spaces? And then finally, some tips to help you follow through. Look through your current list of the types of self-care. If you have some spaces missing, what can you do to improve this area? What do you think would be helpful for you? So remember to keep this, to post it somewhere, a wall, window, computer, anywhere, to remind you daily of these self-care practices. Revisit this list and revise it, and make these practices realistic, okay? So if you want to screenshot this or take a picture of it or write these down, I think it would be really helpful. Because I'm a person that constantly likes to reflect. So every day I take a minute, I think about what just happened, and then I take time. And I think that's important. It's important because it helps with your resilience, it helps with your goals, it helps improve, right, yourself. Another practice that is perfect for promoting SEL and growth mindset and resilience is journaling. Journaling is a wonderful outlet to express feelings, to be able to reflect upon your challenges and ways to deal with them, responding to situational prompts, and it could be interactive between teacher and students. It creates a space to write and reflect on personal goals, self-care plans like the one I just showed you, and can even be used as a check-in. So this image over here is an example of bullet journaling, which has been used more recently as a handwritten tool to develop growth mindsets and source of self-care. And you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of this. I used to scrapbook. This was like years ago, before everything went digital. And then I used to have a planner when I was younger that had like all the dates, and I handwrite everything in. So this is kind of like a mix between a scrapbook and a planner put together. And I think people just miss that time period where you were physically writing and doodling and drawing pictures. When I took notes in school, I was constantly color coding and doodling and drawing little things. And it kept me busy, and it kept my mind off of things too. So this is very helpful because it is a creative process, it's a colorful process, it's personal, it's just for you. And you can include things that are daily goals, you can include weekly, monthly goals, you can monitor your feelings, a list of to-dos, and it's in bullet form. So this is great for all students as well as adults. You don't need to write full sentences. You can write words or phrases, as you see in this example. But it's just a fun thing for people to do. And I actually did something like this 2 summers ago for a writing class. They encouraged bullet journaling as part of our writing process. So at this time, I'd like to go back to the reflective practice that we started with. Okay, so the I have, I am, and I can. And this is really about growth mindset and resilience building. So it can build the personal connection that students have with teachers in the classroom. It can build resilience vocabulary, and it reinforces feelings and beliefs that are valued. So when students write this, I want to stress that they should be able to write this without any concern of who is judging them. So what I mean is that you shouldn't be graded, okay? You shouldn't be checking their spelling or their grammar. They're pouring their hearts out to you, right? They're expressing all their emotions. And once you see all these red X's and things, it just totally takes away from the whole process. So this is something that is personal. It could be kept private. It could just be shared with a teacher. It's not something that is public because it has personal information in it. But this I am section this I am section in the middle, it can be told through so many different ways. Journaling, peer communication, or other forms of expression. It could be through artwork as well. And it should share the struggles, the questions, and stories of their resilience. Some teachers have taken this and changed it up a bit and turned it into a letter to their future self, who they will be in next year, right? And expressing reflecting upon their past year, and then thinking about their hopes and concerns for the future. So I'm hoping that you all have something written down so far about what you have or who you have, and it could be specific. You could say the family member, the teacher, the community member that you trust, that you look up to, the role model in your life. For the I am, this is more of the personal story, the personal narrative. And this is the part that could be just kept for you, And then the I can are these things that you can realistically do soon. So you want to think, like, what can you actually do to make a change? What are you planning so far? So I started writing my own, and I started to think about this as well. I'm very lucky that I have family close to me. I'm very lucky that I have colleagues who are there to support me. Very lucky. I'm actively involved in in a few organizations, right? And that would be my community. During this time in the US, there's a rise of anti-Asian hate. That was the time when I started to reach out to organizations and be more actively involved. I couldn't just sit back. So I started to think about these things, right? I started to do more self-reflection. And I know I want to make a difference. So there are things that I want to accomplish within writing. So I've made specific writing goals for myself. I started journaling, and then I need to make some smaller incremental steps. This is the part where it's like, oh, it's so hard to make this goal and then try to stick to it. But I do go back and I revise. I rethink about what I just planned, and I want to improve, right? So this is my I have, I am, I can. It's something that I want to improve. So I'm hoping that you're considering doing this too. I made this template so that you could use it, but I'm not sure how. Maybe you have to just screenshot it. But looking at your family support, your school support, your community support, what can you do now? Who are you? What can you do soon? So these are more immediate things. So other recommended practices, I had mentioned in the last presentation about checking in, right? Checking in at the beginning of the day, how important it is to do that at the beginning so you know how your students are feeling. There should also be a time of checking out. So what did they learn at the end? What questions do they still have? Then thinking about mindfulness activities. This could be anything from meditation, the breathing exercise that we just did, or artwork, doodling. I highly recommend joining organizations, being more actively involved to build relationships, to socialize and grow professionally. And another thing I highly recommend doing is volunteering. Serving others, I feel like, is a necessity. We need to be connected to our communities. So as I also mentioned in my previous session, each class or school day should end with something positive. And it can be a space to reflect on what was learned. It could connect to our personal experiences to the learning and thinking about ways to move forward. For example, your I have, I am, I can is one example. So looking back at your I have, I am, I can, what is one thing that you could do now? And feel free to type this in the chat. So as you are sharing this, I would like to thank you again for taking the time to be here today. I know this was full of content and of information. So if there are any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out. I have some wonderful references here, and then my contact information, just in case. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saito. What a wonderful presentation. I think that we all needed to hear about this because it's been really hard for teachers, right? And we don't talk about that, and we don't know how to help students either. So this was a great presentation. We have a lot of comments, very nice comments in the chat. I'm gonna read some of them again. Annie Almendares says schools authorities definitely need to understand and respect the teacher's personal time and mental health as well. All this information is important. We're gonna put into practice the tips that Dr. Saito is sharing with us. And there's another good one, resilience, what an important and useful term to know and to put into practice.
Well, I do hope that people are able to at least put one thing into practice, right? Even if it's just one small adjustment, one small change can have an incredible impact on your students. And I do believe that there needs to be partnership between teachers and schools, right? We are the ones that are facing our students, right, every single day. And administrators don't often get that chance to see what's actually happening in the classroom. So our voice is very important in this process, right? Our input should be part of this process. So I appreciate the comments that were shared today. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here, for participating actively, and see you in the next sessions. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.